Most people hear the name Machiavelli and immediately clutch their pearls. Machiavellian has become shorthand for evil, but that's lazy thinking, and frankly, it's wrong. Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't trying to be the devil. He was just the first guy in the room brave enough, or crazy enough, to write down how power actually works. Not how it should work, not how we wish it worked in some utopian fantasy, but how it works in the cold, hard mud of reality. He looked around 16th century Italy, which, by the way, was a complete dumpster fire of warring states and backstabbing popes, and he realized something crucial. Being a good person gets you killed. Being effective keeps you alive. In The Prince, he isn't teaching you to be cruelty for the sake of cruelty. He's warning you that if you play by moral rules against an enemy who has none, you will lose, every time. He rips the mask off the state and shows you the gears turning underneath. It's ugly, it's uncomfortable, but Machiavelli argues it's the only way to survive. Let's rip the Band-Aid off right now. You've been fed a lie. All those philosophers before Machiavelli, they were writing fan fiction. They were obsessing over imaginary republics, fantasizing about utopias that have never existed and never will. They wanted a world where the good guy always wins, and the leader is a saint. Machiavelli, he looks at that and rolls his eyes. He argues that if you waste time focusing on how people should live, you're going to miss how they actually live, and that, he warns, is a one-way ticket to ruin. See, Machiavelli isn't interested in your moral high ground. He's interested in what he calls the effectual truth, the brutal reality of the thing, not the theory, the practice. He points out a terrifyingly simple fact. The gap between how we live and how we ought to live is massive. So massive that if a ruler tries to bridge it with good intentions, they aren't paving a road to paradise, they're digging their own grave. He says it plainly, a man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among so many who are not good. Think about that. It's cynical, sure, but is he wrong? He looks around and sees wolves, liars, deceivers, greedy opportunists, and he tells the prince, wake up. If you act like a lamb in a world of wolves, you don't get a gold star for morality, you get eaten. So here's the pivot that changed political science forever. Machiavelli argues that a prince doesn't need to learn how to be good. That's useless. No, he needs to learn how not to be good. That is the survival skill. He has to know how to use cruelty, how to use deception, and, crucially, when to switch it off. It's not about being a monster for the fun of it. It's about necessity. He insists that the standard for a leader isn't did he follow the rules, it's did he survive? Did the state survive? Because in Machiavelli's eyes, a dead saint is worth a hell of a lot less than a living sinner who kept the kingdom intact. Let's get to the heavy hitter, the line everyone quotes but few actually understand. It is the ultimate dilemma for any leader with a pulse. Should you be the benevolent father figure or the iron-fisted tyrant? Machiavelli looks at this choice and essentially shrugs. Ideally, he argues, you want both. You want the adoration of the crowd and the terrifying respect of your enemies. But here is the problem. He notes that reality rarely offers perfection. The two concepts, love and fear, are like oil and water. They just don't mix well in the real world. So if you have to pick one, Machiavelli doesn't hesitate. Drop the love. Choose fear. Every single time. Now, why would he say something that cold? Because he has zero faith in human nature. This is where he gets cynical. And frankly, he's not wrong. He looks at his fellow man and sees a mess of ingratitude. He describes people as fickle, liars, and cowards. They are greedy little creatures who will promise you the world when ends are going great. They will offer you their blood, their property, and even their kids when danger is far away. But the second the winds change, the moment you actually need them, they turn. They vanish. Machiavelli argues that building your power on the love of the people is like building a castle on quicksand. It collapses the moment pressure is applied. Why? Because love is a choice. It is held together by a chain of obligation, and human beings, being the selfish animals they are, will snap that chain the second it suits their personal interest. Love is too voluntary. It requires the other person to be good, and Machiavelli warns that relying on someone else's goodness is a suicide mission. Fear, on the other hand, fear is reliable. Fear is structural. It is held in place by the dread of punishment, which never fails. It doesn't rely on them being nice. It relies on them not wanting to be hurt. That is a motivation you can take to the bank. But wait, there is a massive catch here, and usually people miss it. Machiavelli draws a sharp, bright line between being feared and being hated. They are not the same thing. He warns that while fear keeps you safe, hatred gets you killed. Hatred breeds conspiracies and assassins. So how do you walk that tightrope? It's surprisingly simple. He advises the prince to keep his hands off the citizens' property and their woman. That's it. He points out a dark truth about human psychology here. A man will get over the execution of his father pretty quickly, but take his inheritance, rob him of his patrimony, he will hold that grudge forever. People can forgive bloodshed, but they never forgive a hit to their wallet. So the strategy is clear. Be terrifying. Be severe when necessary. Make them dread crossing you. But don't be a thief. As long as you respect their stuff, they will tolerate your power. It is a bleak view of the world, sure, but looking around, it's hard to argue he missed the mark. Machiavelli doesn't waste time with fairy tales about how the world should be. He looks at reality and sees a jungle. He argues that there are two distinct ways to fight, by law or by force. Law is for civilized men, but force is for beasts. And here is the problem he identifies immediately. Law often isn't enough. It fails. So a prince must know how to use the beast, but not just any beast. He specifically points to the fox and the lion. It's one of his most famous metaphors, and for good reason. He explains that a lion is ferocious, sure. It scares off the wolves. But a lion is dumb. It walks right into traps because it doesn't understand them. On the other hand, you have the fox. The fox is cunning. It spots the snare a mile away. But the fox is weak. It gets eaten by the wolves. So Machiavelli says you cannot rely on just one. You have to be both. You need to be the fox to discover the snares, and the lion to terrify the wolves. Those who simply act like the lion, they don't understand statecraft. They get caught. And this leads him to a very uncomfortable conclusion about honesty. He warns that a prudent ruler cannot and must not honor his word when it places him at a disadvantage. Why? Because men are a wretched lot. They wouldn't keep their word to you, so you are under no obligation to keep yours to them. If everyone were good, he admits this advice would be terrible. But people aren't good. They are self-interested and fickle, so you have to play the game. But here is the trick he emphasizes. You have to be a great liar. He calls it being a simulator and dissimulator. You have to disguise your true nature perfectly. He observes that men are so simple and so controlled by their immediate needs that a deceiver will always find someone willing to be deceived. He argues that it is actually better to seem to have virtues than to actually possess them. To appear merciful, faithful, humane, and religious is useful, but to actually be those things, that's dangerous. It ties your hands. He wants a prince to have a mind ready to turn whichever way the winds of fortune and the variation of things command. Do not depart from the good when possible, but know how to enter into evil when necessity commands it. That is the way of the fox and the lion. Let's address the elephant in the room immediately. That famous line, "The ends justify the means." People love to throw that around like it's a free pass for tyrants to do whatever they want. But Machiavelli isn't telling you to be a villain just for kicks. He's actually much more practical than that. He argues that in the brutal arena of politics, the end isn't just personal gain, it's survival, specifically the survival of the state. If a prince loses control, people die, chaos reigns. So he posits a terrifying question. Is it better to be technically moral while your city burns to the ground? Or is it better to do something horrific to save it? Machiavelli doesn't care about your feelings. He cares about the scoreboard. He warns that a ruler who insists on being good in every situation will inevitably be destroyed among so many who are not good. It's a math problem to him. If you try to play by the rules of Sunday school in a game of sharks, you lose. And when the prince loses, the people suffer. So he flips the script on virtue. He suggests that what looks like a vice might actually be a virtue if it keeps the peace. And what looks like mercy? It might be the cruelest thing of all. Because a merciful leader who lets crime run rampant destroys the whole community. That's not kindness, that's negligence. This is where he gets really cold. He distinguishes between well-committed cruelty and the messy kind. Yes, he actually uses that term, well-committed cruelty. He argues that if you have to hurt people, do it all at once. Make it swift, make it decisive, get it over with so the population can move on. He warns against being hesitantly cruel. That's the worst of both worlds. If you inflict pain slowly, over time, out of fear or indecision, you just breed resentment. You create enemies who will eventually come for your head. It's inefficient, and Machiavelli hates inefficiency more than he hates sin. Ultimately, he tells us that history is written by the winners. The mob, the general public, are captivated by appearances and outcomes. If the prince succeeds in maintaining the state, the means will always be judged honorable and praised by everyone. It's cynical, sure, but look around. Is he wrong? He points out that we forgive a lot of sins when the economy is good and the streets are safe. We trade morality for security every single day. Machiavelli just had the guts to write it down. He forces us to admit that sometimes we actually want the monster on the wall, as long as he keeps the other monsters away. So, you think you know what virtue means? Forget it. Throw that definition right out the window. When Machiavelli talks about virtù, he isn't talking about being a nice guy or saving your soul. He's talking about raw, unadulterated competence. It's prowess. It's the drive to get things done, no matter how ugly the method. For him, a leader with virtù is flexible, ruthless, and terrifyingly effective. He argues that clinging to the moral high ground usually leads to your ruin. You have to be willing to dirty your hands. But virtù doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has an enemy. Enter Fortuna. Luck, fate, the chaos of the universe. Machiavelli looks at Fortuna and sees a raging, destructive river. It floods, it destroys, and it doesn't care about your plans. Most people just throw up their hands and say, well, it's God's will. Machiavelli calls that cowardice. He admits that Fortuna controls half our actions, sure, but the other half, that's ours. That's where Virtù steps in. He tells us that when the weather is calm, the smart prince builds dikes and dams. You prepare for the disaster before it happens. So when that river eventually floods, and it always does, you channel the water. You don't drown, you survive. Maybe you even profit from the chaos. Then he takes it a step further, and things get a little darker. He famously, and controversially, compares Fortuna to a woman, and in his controversial 16th century view, he argues she yields to the bold. He claims that to master fate, one must be aggressive rather than cautious. It is an ugly, dated metaphor, but the strategic message is clear. You cannot control the cards you are dealt. That's Fortuna. But how you play the hand? That's Virtù. He warns that relying entirely on luck is the mark of a fool, because luck changes, and if you don't change with it, you're finished. You have to be the architect of your own survival, so stop hoping for the best. Build the damn dike. If you want to understand Machiavelli, you have to look at his poster boy, Cesare Borgia, the Duke of Valentino. Now, most people look at Borgia and see a monster. They see a rich kid, the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI. Nepotism at its absolute finest, right? But Machiavelli, he doesn't look at the morality. He looks at the mechanics. He stares right at the sky and sees the perfect prince, or at least the perfect attempt, because Borgia had it all. He had the backing of the church and the French army, but mostly he had the guts to do what was necessary. Machiavelli tells us about the situation in the Romagna. When Borgia took over, the place was total chaos. Local lords were robbing their subjects, not governing them. It was weak. It was unstable. So what does Borgia do? He doesn't send a Peace Corps or a negotiator. He sends Ramiro de Orco, a cruel, efficient, nasty piece of work. Machiavelli points out that Ramiro did exactly what he was hired to do. He crushed the resistance and established order, peace through tyranny. But here's the catch. Ramiro was hated, and Borgia knew that hatred is dangerous. No trial, no warning, just a brutal display of power. Machiavelli writes about this with a sort of cold awe. He says the spectacle left the people satisfied and stupefied. Note the combination. Satisfied because the cruel governor was dead. Stupefied because the duke was the one who killed him. It's brilliant. It's terrifying. Machiavelli argues that this single act did two things at once. It purged the anger of the people, and it signaled that the Duke was the ultimate power. He took the credit for the order Ramiro brought, but he executed Ramiro to wash his hands of the cruelty. He used the tool, then he broke the tool. Machiavelli warns us not to flinch here. He wants us to see the utility. Borgia wasn't being evil for fun. He was being effective. He bought stability with blood, and in Machiavelli's eyes, that's a bargain. Sure, Borgia eventually collapsed. His father died, and he got sick at the worst possible moment. Machiavelli admits it was bad luck, a roll of the dice he couldn't control. But the method, the strategy, to Machiavelli, that was flawless. Here is where Machiavelli stops being a philosopher and starts being a spin doctor. He argues that having all the traditional virtues, mercy, faith, integrity, is actually a disaster waiting to happen. If you actually practice them all the time, you will lose your throne. It sounds harsh, but he insists the world is simply too wicked for a saint to survive in it. A ruler who insists on being good in every situation will inevitably be destroyed by the vast number of men who are not good. So what's the alternative? He suggests a terrifying kind of flexibility. You must learn how not to be good, and use that knowledge, or not use it, according to necessity. It's about survival, not salvation. But here is the twist. While you shouldn't be virtuous, Machiavelli insists you must absolutely appear to be. Appearances are everything. He treats qualities like piety and honesty as tools, not commandments. You display them when they serve you. You hide them when they make you weak. He points out that people are generally simple-minded and obsessed with their immediate needs. Because they are so easily distracted, a ruler can easily deceive them. He explicitly praises the ability to be a great simulator and dissimulator. Think of it as acting. Machiavelli notes that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Why? Because everyone can see you, but very few actually come close enough to touch you. The mob sees the pomp, the speeches, and the apparent holiness. They swallow the performance whole. He warns that the few who do know the real you, the cold, calculating schemer underneath, won't dare oppose the opinion of the many. The crowd is swayed by the result and the surface appearance. And in the world of politics, the vulgar are practically everyone. This brings us to his famous advice about the fox. You can't just be a lion scaring off wolves. You have to be a fox to recognize traps. Part of that fox-like nature is knowing when to break your word. He argues that a prudent ruler cannot and must not honor his word when it places him at a disadvantage. If all men were good, this would be bad advice. But they aren't good, they are wretched, and would break their word to you. So you are under no obligation to keep yours to them. You just need a good excuse to cover up the breach. In Machiavelli's eyes, the winner writes the history books, and the winner is always the best liar. Most philosophers love to talk about utopias. They build these shimmering, perfect little castles in the sky where everyone is nice, the king is just, and nobody stabs anyone in the back. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? But Machiavelli takes one look at that pretty picture and tears it to absolutely shreds. He calls these imaginary republics. He warns that if you waste your time obsessing over how the world ought to be, you're going to miss how it actually is. And that gap, that is exactly where you die. That's the effective truth, or verità effettuale, and it is the brutal cornerstone of everything he wrote. He argues that the world is a messy, chaotic place, not a nursery for noble souls. It isn't filled with people waiting to hold hands. It's filled with liars, cheats, and people who will ruin you to get ahead. So if you act like a saint in a den of wolves, don't be surprised when you get eaten. Machiavelli points out that a ruler who insists on being good all the time is writing their own obituary. It's political suicide. Now, he isn't saying you have to be a monster just for the fun of it. That's the amateur interpretation. He's saying you have to be capable of being a monster if the situation demands it. It's a tool, not a lifestyle. He strips away the moral varnish we like to paint over politics and forces us to look at the engine underneath. It's cold, mechanical, and it runs on power, not prayers. You can have the noblest intentions in history, but if you lose power because you were too nice to crush a rebellion, your intentions don't matter. You failed. That is the cold shower Machiavelli gives us. He tells us that men are ungrateful, fickle, pretenders, and avoiders of danger. Ouch. But ask yourself, is he actually wrong? He argues that people will promise you the world when things are going well. They'll offer you their blood, their gold, even their own kids. But the absolute second danger approaches, they turn on you. They revolt. So relying on their love or their good nature is a gamble you will inevitably lose. He suggests relying on fear instead, because fear is dependable. Fear sticks around when love walks out the door. This is Realpolitik before the word even existed. It's the art of dealing with the world as it sits right in front of you, warts and all. It demands you ignore the fantasy version where the good guys always win. He warns that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation, because in Machiavelli's analysis, the good guys usually end up in a shallow grave. Machiavelli looks at the world and sees a chaotic mess. He argues that roughly half of our lives are governed by pure chance, or Fortuna. But don't think of a friendly Lady Luck handing out lottery tickets. He describes fortune as a violent flooding river that rips trees out of the ground and destroys buildings. It's terrifying. But here's the catch. He points out that just because the river floods, that doesn't mean you just sit there and drown. You build dikes, you dig canals, you prepare for the storm while the sky is blue. If you wait until the water is at your ankles, you're already dead. It's a brutal assessment of human laziness. We wait for the crisis to react, and Machiavelli says that's why we lose.
But the water isn't the only thing that changes. The times change, the social mood changes, and this is where he identifies the real killer of great leaders: consistency. We love consistency, right? We call it integrity. Machiavelli calls it a death sentence. He argues that men are successful only as long as their methods match the circumstances. Take a cautious man. He moves slowly, checks his corners, avoids risks. If the times call for caution, he looks like a genius. He prospers. But what happens when the wind shifts? What happens when the situation demands a sudden, violent strike? He warns that the cautious man cannot change his nature, so he freezes. He keeps playing the old game while the rules have changed. He fails not because he's stupid, but because he's stubborn. Machiavelli is obsessed with this rigidity. He notes that we become victims of our own success. If a strategy worked yesterday, you're going to try it today. It's human nature. But he warns that the timeline doesn't care about your past wins. Look at Pope Julius II. Machiavelli watched this guy operate. Julius was a madman, acting on pure impulse, moving with ferocious speed. He succeeded because the era favored bold action. But Machiavelli dryly notes that if Julius had lived long enough to see a time that required patience, he would have been ruined. He wouldn't have been able to stop the car. He would have crashed right into the wall. So what is the solution? It's not comforting. Machiavelli argues that to survive, you have to kill your own personality. You have to be a shapeshifter. If the times demand a lion, you roar. If they demand a fox, you lie. You cannot be attached to a specific virtue or a specific way of doing things. Morality is just baggage here. If you are merciful when you need to be cruel, you lose. If you are honest when you need to deceive, you lose. He tells us that the successful ruler commands the stars rather than obeying them. You adapt or you perish. There is no third option. Machiavelli looks at a ruler enjoying a nice, quiet peace and sees a victim in the making. He argues that the single most dangerous mistake a leader can make is assuming peace is permanent. It isn't. It is just a temporary ceasefire. He warns that the moment a prince stops thinking about war, he has already begun to lose his state. It's harsh, sure, but look at the history he cites. He points out that princes who cared more about fine amenities, expensive clothes, or refined living than they did about weapons usually ended up dead or exiled. There is no middle ground here. War is the only art a prince absolutely must master. Everything else, that's just window dressing. If you don't know how to fight, you don't deserve to rule. It's that simple. Machiavelli creates a striking image to drive this home: the relationship between an armed man and an unarmed man. He asks, why would the guy with the sword obey the guy without one? It defies logic. It defies nature. He insists that an unarmed man is fundamentally suspicious to a soldier, and a soldier is fundamentally dangerous to an unarmed ruler. There is no respect there, only contempt.
So a prince cannot just hire people to fight for him while he reads philosophy. He has to be the expert. He has to be the soldier. Machiavelli advises that even in the deepest peace, the prince must be sweating. He advocates for rigorous physical exercise, specifically hunting. Not the leisurely, rich guy kind of hunting, but brutal, tactical drills. Harden the body to the elements. But why hunting? He argues it's about data. You need to know the nature of the land. How high do the mountains rise? How do the valleys open up? Where are the swamps? He emphasizes that if you don't know your own terrain intimately, you can't defend it. And if you know your own land, you can understand the enemy's land too. But the physical grind isn't enough. He demands a relentless mental game. A prince should never let his mind wander. When walking through the countryside with friends, he shouldn't be admiring the view. He should be running simulations. If the enemy attacks from that hill and we are down here, who has the advantage? How would we retreat? How would we pursue them? He points to historical figures like Philopoemen, a leader who never stopped asking what if. Machiavelli loves this guy. He praises him because Philopoemen solved every tactical problem in his head years before they ever happened on the field. That is the standard. He warns that fortune is like a violent river. It floods, it destroys. You don't build dams when the water is already at your neck. You build them when the sun is shining and the river is calm. If you wait for trouble to arrive before you prepare, you're finished. Machiavelli is clear. Be armed, be prepared, or be replaced. Machiavelli doesn't have time for your optimism. He looks at the chaos of the world, the rise and fall of princes, the sheer unpredictability of life, and he refuses to call it fate. He calls it Fortuna. And make no mistake, he views fortune not as a benevolent force, but as a violent, ruinous river. He argues that this river is dangerous. It floods, it destroys plains, it rips up trees and buildings, shifting earth from one side to the other. Everyone flees before it. Everyone yields to its fury because there is simply no stopping it when it rages. It's a terrifying picture. But here is where he pivots. He points out that just because the river is violent, that doesn't mean we are helpless. He claims that half of our actions are governed by chance, sure, but the other half, that belongs to us. That is where virtue, skill, guts, power comes in. He warns that the fatal flaw of most leaders is complacency. When the weather is calm, nobody thinks about storms. They relax, they get lazy. Machiavelli thinks that's suicidal. He insists that when the river is quiet, that is exactly when you should be building dikes and dams. You dig canals, you reinforce the banks. So when the flood eventually comes, and he guarantees it will come, the water might be channeled safely away, or at least it won't be quite so devastating. He is telling us that ruin isn't just bad luck, it's a lack of preparation. Then things get a little darker. He shifts from engineering metaphors to something more visceral. He asks, is it better to be cautious or impetuous? He doesn't hesitate. He argues you should be rash, you should be aggressive. Why? Because in one of his most infamous and brutal analogies, he explicitly characterizes fortune as a woman. And according to his 16th century worldview, she likes to be mastered. He says she yields to the young, the bold and the fierce, not the hesitant. He claims she lets herself be won by those who treat her roughly, rather than those who act cold or calculating. It's ugly, it's misogynistic. But strip away the metaphor and look at the strategic reality he's preaching. He is saying that hesitation is death. If you wait for the perfect moment to act, the moment passes. The river rises, the opportunity vanishes. He observes that a prince who relies entirely on fortune is ruined the moment she changes her mind. But the bold man, the prepared man, he forces the issue. He adapts. Machiavelli points out that if your nature is cautious and the times demand caution, you thrive. But if the times change and demand aggression, the cautious man is destroyed because he cannot change his ways. So he concludes with a simple, hard truth. It is better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortune is a force to be conquered, not a god to be prayed to. So you're in a tight spot, and you're eyeing that big, powerful neighbor. You think, hey, maybe they can help me out. But Machiavelli would slap that thought right out of your head. He warns that relying on a more powerful ally is arguably the stupidest thing a leader can do. It looks like a safety net, sure, but it's actually a noose. Machiavelli calls these forces auxiliaries, dangerous tools that you borrow from someone else. Think about the cold, hard logic here. If that powerful ally comes in and loses the battle for you, well, you're destroyed. Game over. But here's the kicker. If they win, you're their prisoner. You just invited a shark into your swimming pool to eat the barracuda. Now you're stuck in the pool with the shark. It's a lose-lose scenario wrapped in a handshake. He points out that mercenaries are bad because they're lazy, but powerful allies are worse because they're competent. They have their own agenda, and that agenda usually involves turning your kingdom into their appetizer. Machiavelli looks at history, specifically the Italians calling in the French, and he just shakes his head. He argues that a wise prince would rather lose with his own troops than win with someone else's. Why? Because a victory that isn't yours isn't a real victory. It's debt. And in the world of power politics, debt is paid with your autonomy. You don't want to owe favors to giants. Giants don't have friends. They have food. Let's dig deeper into the psychology of this. Machiavelli insists that fear is the only reliable leash. But when you bring in an ally who is stronger than you can't scare them. You can't control them. You are handing them the keys to your house and hoping they don't change the locks while you're sleeping. He's cynical, yeah, but is he wrong? He sees alliances not as friendships, but as temporary alignments of interest. The second that alignment shifts, the second you are no longer useful, you are disposable. He warns that the only safe way to survive is to stand on your own 2 feet, even if those feet are a bit shaky. Better to be the master of a small, weak army than the servant of a massive, borrowed one. So what's the verdict? Machiavelli tells us to be paranoid, be suspicious of the helping hand. He argues that dependency is the ultimate weakness. If you can't defend yourself, you don't deserve to rule. That's harsh, but that's the game. Don't look for a savior. Saviors have a nasty habit of becoming conquerors. Trust yourself. Trust your own steel, and keep the big dogs outside the gate. Say the name Machiavelli and watch the reaction. People recoil. We've turned his name into an adjective for sociopaths in expensive suits. You picture a villain in the shadows, twisting a mustache, plotting to crush the weak. But that's lazy thinking. Machiavelli wasn't a monster. He was a guy who got fired, tortured, and exiled, then decided to write a user manual on how to keep your job. He wasn't inventing evil. He was just taking notes. He looked at history, the bloody, messy reality of it, and noticed a pattern. The good guys usually lost. The honorable ones ended up dead. So he asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. What actually works? He argues that if you want to hold power, you cannot afford the luxury of traditional morality. You can be a saint, sure, but you won't be a prince for long. He warns that a man who tries to be good all the time will come to ruin among so many who are not good. It's a slap in the face, but look around. Is he wrong? He points out that the world is volatile and people are fickle. They lie, they're greedy. To survive that, a leader must be adaptable. He says you must learn how not to be good. He doesn't say be evil. He says learn to suspend your goodness when the situation demands it. It's a tool. That's what really disturbs us. It's the coldness. He discusses political murder the way an accountant discusses tax loopholes. It's just mechanics. He argues that cruelty, if used well, can actually be compassionate. Sounds twisted, right? But follow the logic. If you execute 3 rebels to stop a civil war that would kill thousands, aren't you the hero? He forces us to do the math on human suffering. He treats violence like surgery. You don't do it because you enjoy it. You do it because it's necessary to save the patient. In this case, the patient is the state. And if your hand shakes, everyone dies. We hate him because he holds up a mirror.
He rips the curtain down. He argues that results are the only things that matter. Did you keep the peace? Did you secure the borders? Then nobody cares how you did it. He claims that the ends accuse, but the outcome excuses. It's brutal, it's ugly, but he's not the one doing the killing. We want to eat the steak, but pretend the cow died of old age. Machiavelli just points at the blood on the floor. He isn't evil. He's just the only honest witness in history.